3. Reservoir Dogs, Script and Screenplay Analysis by Sean McHugh 2020-26, Part 3 of 12.
11. What are Blonde's mistakes with Nash?
Blonde has kept quiet under duress in captivity for his boss, yet fails to consider sufficiently that Nash may be keeping quiet under duress in captivity for his boss, Blonde also having had years to think about the process, while Joe further asks the robbers to keep quiet about themselves now. Orange, to the side, is likewise keeping quiet in terms of his boss. Blonde's boss has been important to him, but instead he tries to deny to Nash, his prisoner, that he has one at all, just because Nash mentions it, again being lost in hatred, including for Nash representing society, instead of pausing to think. Moreover, Blonde, as homosexual, as given in his office conversation, should be particularly aware of incognito situations.
Blonde plays the Stealers' Wheel song Stuck in the Middle with You in reference to Nash as stuck with Blonde between the other robbers and the other police, who are both presently away, plus Orange, who he doesn't want to betray. Its background lyrics, in parallel with Blonde's background awareness, include "I've got the feeling that something ain't right" for the infiltration, and "Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right" for the other robbers.
The lyrics for Nash are also trying to make some sense of it all, because he was in the unwitting second wave, and thence in a vulnerable place as allowing Blonde's abduction. He's seen the other group of police already at the store and recognizes Orange at the warehouse from a previous meeting as evidently undercover, and so deduces there was a setup, but he's unaware before Orange tells him that the police know about the warehouse, yet are choosing not to enter yet. Then, "I'm so scared in case I fall off my chair, and it's so hard to keep this smile from my face," is what he knows about the setup, and Orange, all with Blonde, in front of him, despite his fear of him.
Even while Blonde sings the words and dances to them, he doesn't see how they can apply to him and his situation, and with his dissociated thinking and fixation on killing Nash instead, he's killed first. The gross emotional contrast between the torture and the tuneful, catchy music parallels Blonde's, all the characters, and Westerners' disjunctions between themselves and their environment.
In contrast to Nash as a police-trained observer, Blonde at the store in his desire for torture later doesn't register the two groups of police properly, even though he was there for longer than Nash, and then at the warehouse seeing Pink as joined by White, being sure about a setup and beating Nash for information. Blonde saying he doesn't care what Nash knows or not is sensing correctly Nash knows only a limited amount, as following Blonde's relatively easy abduction of him, but Blonde fails to listen to Pink's essential point of police arriving too soon after the alarm, and that there must be a serious problem here. Nash, however, has added inward smirking at Blonde for willfully failing to interrogate him when they're in a perfect position for it, and instead Blonde allowing himself to think that there was no setup, and thus that he's safe to be at the warehouse. Blonde on arrival disagrees with White and Pink, saying the place isn't safe, and starts fighting with White. But White is right, despite changing his mind, at least outwardly, about a setup only at that point because of his dislike for Blonde. Nash says to Blonde he doesn't know about a setup because he's only been on the force 8 months and they don't tell him anything. This suggests there could nonetheless be a setup, and indeed he now knows there is, and that it's just undisclosed to other police as not directly involved, and including him. But then he says, even your boss said there wasn't a setup, in suspiciously changing his tactic. In pleading with Blonde, he halts himself and says, "I don't know anything about any fucking guys," in conflating lying about who set them up and the robbers he's seen at the warehouse, who he doesn't know. These words, under stress, also indicate subliminal awareness of the White and Orange fucking, from knowing Orange previously and witnessing of White's commitment to him, as well as Orange fucking with the robbers metaphorically. He's arguing against Eddie earlier, saying they can't release him because he's seen them, and moreover, he doesn't know where the warehouse is, because he's been in the boot and could be returned it and driven away. Nash, knowing who Orange is the main thing he has to go on in making sense of the situation. And he follows this with, "I'm not going to say anything," as again conflating saying nothing about the robbers to other police and saying nothing to Blonde about Orange even at this point. After Blonde is dead, he also says, "and cuts my fucking ear off," with fucking emphasized to align the film's dramatic center here with its central issue of fucking, that the characters don't sufficiently perceive via listening with their ears. Nash and Orange further repeatedly use the expletive in their subsequent conversation.
Blonde, at the breakfast diner, tells Eddie that the content Eddie missed in the song he likes was plain to hear, with Blonde smiling self-confidently at Eddie's naivete that Blonde is already familiar with. But the content Blonde misses in his song he likes on the same radio station is even plainer to hear. Eddie says he zoned out instead of listening, and Blonde does exactly the same in torturing Nash instead of considering Orange. Blonde could also give Eddie's Vicki Lawrence song more attention, as Vic is his real name. Moreover, the 70s music radio station and the character's interest in wider popular culture centered on that decade reflect a peak of Western creativity now in decline, while Blonde also cultivates mannerisms from earlier decades. Then Eddie's baiting of Blonde's sexuality in the office prompted Blonde not to listen to Eddie, with Blonde making a show of putting a finger into an ear. The sexual repression that emerges at the film's core and affects Blonde translates into his failure to listen and think later. Groundlessly rational Western culture is at odds with human nature and represses its irrational sexuality, and especially homosexuality, as a defect and aberration, even while it needn't affect anything else. Blonde half-heartedly denies to Eddie his orientation with, "If I was a butt cowboy," but also "I might break you" in "Nice Guy." Moreover, Blonde also naively disagreed with Brown's opening interpretation of the Madonna song Like a Virgin and what it subtly meant about confused, virginal-type thinking, and in the process mentioning the Bubble Yum brand of bubblegum, yet the radio announcer for Blonde's song in the warehouse gives its genre as bubblegum. Neither Blonde's, Eddie's, or Brown's songs, however, are lightweight or to be disregarded, and despite Blonde's self-assurance, he's no less lost than the others. He says the store workers deserved what they got from him, but then he deserves what he gets from Orange, whose 12 shots at him would also compare with those Blonde fired. Blonde cuts Nash's ear off and has a laugh in talking to it, but it's he who is deaf to Pink, the music, Nash, and what Nash might further be persuaded to say. Even while looking long and hard at it in his hand, he's not jolted to ensure his own listening isn't likewise detached, and that the other team member present isn't a serious risk. While Blonde gets a petrol can from his car, an alarm is heard, but again he doesn't listen for it to give him pause. He glances around furtively and thinks he's okay. But by contrast, he should be considering if the warehouse is indeed being monitored for Joe's arrival, and that Orange, as the agent, will be forced to kill him because of what he's planning to do. The alarm is heard in the distance, all as Blonde's internal alarm bells that should have been ringing are distant from or lost to his conscious mind. He's explained that he killed store workers for setting off their alarm, but he was quietly pleased to hear it. For him to both respond sadistically and encourage police to arrive for an abduction, and in parallel fails to be alarmed by the alarm while walking back with the petrol, as again preceding his sadism. Ignoring the alarm here also confirms his lying to White, saying, "I don't like alarms." He jokes in his office conversation with Joe and Eddie that Eddie doesn't know what's going on, while claiming he does. But in fact, he's no more onto Orange than Eddie is. This all being back to front, along with the abduction as impossibly being for Blonde to get away from the police, is reflected in Nash's handcuffs during his beating, as the scene is interspersed with Eddie's phone call to Dov recounting Blonde describing the abduction, changing from behind his back to his front for being attached to a hook, and then behind his back again for being taped to the chair. Blonde takes a look at Orange and supposes unthinkingly both that he's incapacitated and that the police shot him, but the truth is rapidly catching up with Blonde. The petrol can is orange, with blonde lettering saying danger, as expressive of the warning Blonde should recognize about orange, but he only considers that Nash is in danger of the petrol. He's also prepared with gray adhesive tape, reflecting his plus white and orange's gray area sexualities. Then at the petrol station behind Pink during his robbery escape down the road from the store, and which Blonde would have used to fill his can, is a parallel blonde petrol stand with two protective red-orange bollards in front, plus blonde and orange roof edging on both its roofs, all as the blonde and orange petrol can. There are also two white pumps alongside two blonde pumps with their phallic reference, while the roof over the pumps has a white top and ceiling. Again, Blonde fails to think. The cut ear is seen on the floor in the corner of the screen in front of Orange as Blonde collapses, while his inability in this key scene applies to all the virginal-minded characters, including particularly Eddie and White, plus Pink on their return to the warehouse. Pink observes the side of Nash's head, insensibly supporting Orange's false talk about Blonde's actions, but as with the others, doesn't look to the floor in continuing their failure to listen and understand the evolving situation. Moreover, the original Stuck in the Middle with You eponymous album record cover is white lettering over a background of 5 men washed out in orange, as the other 5 men in the robbery team completely compromised by undercover orange. The song and album title also suggests coital sex as central to the film, and the song is centrally positioned in the film, while the Stealers Wheel Band as Stealers references the robbers. 12. What do Nash's 9 afflictions mean? These items reference respectively the men's and thence Western people's troubles in society of being kept in the dark, taken for a ride, taking kicks and punches, getting slaps in the face, pressures to stay silent, feeling like their world is ending, false faces as failure to be themselves, the inability to listen to each other properly, and lastly, the chance to reform from an impending metaphorical conflagration. They parallel Brown saying dick 9 times in his story, as the masses being repeatedly exploited in their disjointed like a virgin mental state he describes, having less consciousness and in their overthinking culture. The horror with Nash's aesthetically and memorably portrayed facial damage and blood is that of real life out of the masses' inability to make better critical judgments. However, their inability to make sense of abuse as the social elite's abuse of them, given as the dramatic center of a film of critical content which they don't make sense of, then justifies that abuse by its indication of less consciousness and value in them. There is a no parking sign on the door outside that Blonde faces as he walks through 3 times, but then jokes to Nash, "I think I'm parked in the red zone," in referring to Nash's blood, when indeed he is in the red danger zone, as mentally parked in the idea of the job not being infiltrated, or even this not being important. There's a further reference to parking his car near the store in advance for his abduction plans, as also being a bad idea. Again, the character subliminally says aloud what another area of his mind has some recognition of, and should be considering carefully. 13. What's Nash's mistake? Marvin Nash puts his concerns about his personal appearance before his colleague bleeding to death next to him, and hence doesn't seem to have chosen well in his career with its demands. Perhaps Lee Marvin, who Blonde mentions, is an unrealistic model for him as a tough guy actor with policeman roles. As he's initially beaten by the robbers, the Joe Tech song I Gotcha is heard, including the line Don't Say Nothing, as applying to what Nash knows of Orange. The song is about a jilted boyfriend who stops his partner getting away from him, hence reflecting White killing Orange at the end, when Orange thought he'd get away from him, while the singer and song names compare with Joe as having got all the characters under his wider influence. In an impressive moment, however, Nash explains that he knows who Orange is, yet didn't try using this to bargain with Blonde, even when he was about to be burnt, nor called out to Freddie as Orange for help, whether conscious or trying to rouse him. He saved his life, yet Orange then plays this down, thinking only of his own ongoing predicament,
and of him saving Nash's life in killing Blonde, and condemns Nash for asking how he looks. Nash is self-regarding and ungrateful, but Orange is even more. Moreover, Orange further indicates Nash is in the second wave, because Orange doesn't recognize him and thinks he has to tell him he's a cop. Orange would have met and become familiar with the setup police for them to recognize and avoid shooting him while possibly working with him during the robbery, particularly as he was assigned door duty. Nash also doesn't know the police are waiting a block away for Joe to arrive, as he would if he was in the setup. Then, as he recognizes Orange only from an unrelated previous meeting, if he saw Orange at the robbery, along with other police already there, he may have failed to think fast enough to take action to protect himself from an unknown situation as involving his abductor, Blonde. Orange may not recall their previous meeting because he didn't see or think about Nash at the store, and because of the beating that compromises his appearance. 14. Why does Joe tell them not to talk about themselves personally, including where they might have done time? His initial concern here is less for the group's security than keeping Blonde from talking about himself to the others, and hence them feeling they don't want to work with someone of his psychopathy, his history of being caught, and his sexuality, while also discrediting Joe. Joe's strategy to keep Blonde quiet here is a subtle extension of the previous situation with Blonde keeping quiet in prison. Blonde's face, however, shows he's instantly on to Joe and sees his request as unfair and goes straight into his sadistic plans anyway, for the others to find out what he's like. Indeed, later in the narrative, following Blonde's actions, although exacerbated by sexual rivalry and overall similarity to White's shortcomings, White repeatedly indicates his alienation from them both. Joe has thought ahead with the use of aliases in the meetings with his existing contacts that he wants to work of White and Orange plus Pink, before the group planning meeting as including Blonde, Brown, and Blue, arranged only on the morning of the robbery. Joe, via Eddie on collecting Pink in his car, has given Pink his name as a proxy target for Blonde, as Pink is one of the younger personalities, but with a lifelong friendship that can withstand some mistreatment. Joe might prefer to call Blonde Pink as a feminine color to insult him via his sexuality, but Blonde wouldn't take it, and at least with the cultural conditions, the other store robbers would then have the more reason to dislike him on an all-male team, although it emerges that White and probably Orange also already know Blonde's sexuality. Pink complains about his name, particularly as he now sees how it contrasts with the others, and Joe replies jokingly, but with excessive annoyance that surprises Pink, that he's a faggot or derogatory shameful gay man, when he very likely isn't, as Joe speaking what's on his mind, but drawing the attention away from Blonde. Joe then tells Pink to be thankful he's not Mr. Yellow, as meaning cowardly, when he slyly gives this color to Blonde. But while Joe's engaged in all this strategizing over Blonde, he fails to see there are not only two further gays on the team, but they have a developed relationship, which is compromising it. The color blonde is also associated more with women's hair, to hint at Blonde's sexuality, while the spelling given in the final credits is with an E at the end, reflecting its originating French feminine adjective form, in contrast to the standard American spelling without the E. Moreover, Blonde also visibly questions his name as Joe gives it to him, and with Joe immediately then transferring to Pink as not Yellow, Joe probably notices Blonde's adverse reactions to the keeping from talking, homophobia, and the alias color, and hence insists to Pink there can be no name changes or swapping with White, who again is really gay, as he doesn't want Blonde to ask for the same. Blonde tries to laugh at the faggot jibe, but is offended, and Eddie shares his discomfort at Joe's hatred coming through, while Orange smiles in the background, as Joe doesn't know about his or his boyfriend's sexuality. At the end of the Joe and Pink exchange, Blonde and Eddie also turn to Pink to see that he agrees to the name, despite the gay overtones. Joe covers Blonde in saying to keep quiet about wives' names, as Blonde not having one, but again unwittingly helps the other gay men on the team.
He may also be having the planning meeting on the day of the robbery, with only the breakfast for the men to bond together, to keep down the possibility of Blonde developing a sexual relationship with anyone else. But again, this has already happened with White, through his involvement in Orange's recruitment and thereafter.
Blonde's prison time seems to have made him the more vengeful and sociopathic, and he's full of hatred and disregard for everything, hence also raising the question of whether prison, although one of society's major institutions, only worsens criminals, and there are better ways of dealing with them. However, his mutual irritation with Joe over his prison release being ignored, along with the world denouncing his sexuality, may have converted into greater determination to be his lethal self at the store and warehouse. Moreover, Joe has twice arranged at least partial socializing with White and Orange before the planning meeting here, as further showing Joe's instruction for quiet has other motives.
He mentions rhetorically not talking about a bank that the men might have robbed in St. Petersburg, a city in Florida, but with subliminal reference to the larger Russian city that it's named after, as this had a name change in 1991, only a year before the film was finished, in comparison with the robbers having to change their names now. Also, the word root Petr, as meaning rock or stone, is a further reference between such bank robbery and diamond store robbery now, along with it giving the word petrol, as used for Nash and Orange having been recruited in Smoky Pete's bar. Then, Saint looks to Joe's St. Sebastian wall painting, with Sebastian's forbearance as requested of the men here.
15. What mistake does Joe make in insisting on aliases? Joe insists on the importance of false identities and gets into strenuous arguments about them, but with Blonde on his mind as a motive nonetheless, fails to consider that anyone might already have a false identity to use against him. Despite his bawling, he doesn't listen to himself. The problems from Joe's inability to find a way out of his situation with Blonde further build, as his incognito rules then help Orange's subterfuge with the others, avoiding asking him about his past and allowing him to keep an invented personal history to a minimum.
The robbers' facades covering over personal issues also parallel the police from their side covering over witting or unwitting miscalculations as emerge in their undercover operation and then epitomize the wider culture's falsity and troubles. Moreover, the incognito rules harshly handed down are the actors' non-disclosure agreements about the film's critical content. This scene begins with Joe saying, "Let me tell a joke about robbers in prison after being caught." But he says, 5 guys instead of 6, out of subliminal awareness of one of them not being who they seem, and who would then be free. He had also said to White in their office meeting that it's a 5-man job, before his meeting with Blonde and being obliged to add him, but fails to change the number here. Joe also says to Blonde in the office that the job has about 5 other guys, rather than just 5 other guys, out of his background worry of recruiting someone false, due to the job's urgency to get him out of trouble, and hence its lack of caution, and which does materialize because of Blonde, who he's talking to now, being under surveillance. Also, in Joe's mistrust of Blonde as sociopathic and unpredictable, he gives him a role only doubling Blue's crowd control, and not the crucial roles of securing the diamonds from the manager in the back. He could have given Blonde the simpler door duty role, and not then recruited youngster Orange for it, but he mistrusts Blonde even for this. Blonde nonetheless deliberately overreacts to the alarm being set off, to kill civilians, then kill and abduct police.
Further, in Joe discussing why he doesn't let the store robbers choose their colors, he says 4 guys will argue over a treacherous Mr. Black, as this subliminally being all but White and Orange, who have secrets to keep and wouldn't want to draw attention to themselves, even as they're most suited to the name. Moreover, policeman Freddy trying to act Robber Orange parallels the actor being an Englishman trying to play an American.
Joe's joke is to berate the robbers for joking with each other too much, but before he's given 3 of them their aliases, so that those could have already exchanged real names and backgrounds while unwittingly asking and encouraging the other 3. He's having the planning meeting where the store robbers, White and Orange, meet for the first time, right before the job, to minimize risks of them talking about it to anyone else, and compromising secrecy. But avoiding personal details and using aliases was derived initially out of Blonde's recruitment to smooth his presence over longer periods, and hence it slips Joe's mind at first.
Furthermore, aliases where no one who's caught can identify others to the police under interrogation shows concern for the store robbers, but is of secondary concern to Joe, as they know and could still inform on him and Eddie, and hence, again, he forgets to give the aliases out at the start before anyone starts talking. Then, although at the meeting he tells them not to talk about themselves personally, after they redress, he immediately takes them for breakfast, where they chat uninhibitedly about various personal likes and dislikes, and hence undermining anonymity. This also follows Joe's 2 bar meetings with White and Orange, while he may know of their further meetings, though not their love relation, including Orange accompanying White for the store reconnaissance, and getting guidance from White as Orange younger, with less claimed experience. Joe's joke is rhetorical, but subsequently shown to be on him when they all get killed because of his weak planning, while in parallel, Orange's manager asks him to tell his fake drug story, similar to a joke, where its sub-story again gains truth content and comes to be on him. White is a long-term friend and senior, although intermittent worker for Joe, who helps interview and recruit Orange, and hence Joe gives them their aliases at this point, and only confirms them at the planning meeting, where all 6 store robbers get them. In advance of the planning meeting, Orange gives his and White's names to his manager. Then out of his relationship with White, he develops an interest in white color for his clothing and apartment, and in the car journey to the planning meeting, he notices the complex white women discussion as referencing White. Then Eddie, on collecting Pink for the planning meeting with White and Orange in the car, also gives him his alias then for their introductions, and moreover, the White and Orange stationary car conversation shows Joe has already advised them, likely during their socializing, of the 6 aliases with their robbery roles, even though they don't yet know who is who. Personal names and details, however, were never successfully avoided, as during Orange's recruitment, White divulges details that Orange's manager shows may be used to identify him. Also, in Blonde's office, conversation Eddie and Joe indicate that regular workers like him are avoided for major robberies, presumably as they may know each other. However, while he's the only one on the team, Joe will also have asked White and Orange not to indicate to him and the others that they've met with the Cabots socially twice, as extending beyond Orange's recruitment. White and Pink are long-term friends of Joe, but they don't know each other. Meanwhile, Eddie in the office, referring to Blonde as among the boys, parallels the 2-car policeman calling undercover Orange our boy, as indicating policing or criminality being narrowly distinguished life choices, and both groups having similar concerns about deception. Joe is using mild deception to keep discussion between the robbers to a minimum, largely because of Blonde, when he's socialized with some of them and discussed the planning, including the store's location, at least with White, perhaps in their office meeting, who then discusses it with Orange. Joe's failure to be consistent about keeping information and interaction tightly to the planning meeting on the day, and not before, means, particularly via White's subsequent special relationship with Orange, that extra details were given to the police for the sting. In the heated discussion by Pink, Joe and White at the meeting over Pink being given his name, when asking, "Why am I Mr. Pink?" he avoids mentioning that Eddie's already told him his name, and instead, like White and Orange, as also in Eddie's car, he supports Joe, suggesting there has been no interaction before now. Here he's also uncomfortable with his name, as a female or gay color, being given him in the presence of newcomers, and wants to show resistance to it.
Moreover, the white and orange stationary car reconnaissance visit to the store is shown immediately after the planning meeting, but takes place on a previous day, as they're in different clothes and finish by going to buy food, and where Orange can later advise his manager of the store and various planning details, including his door roll. The scene is prefaced with 2 or 3 black and white photos of the store that White has likely taken for Joe and the planning meeting with his chalkboard sketch, where a tree shadow by the store entrance on one photo indicates it was taken with the sun lower in the sky sometime before the conversation, likely in mid-morning. Instead, the planning meeting is chronologically followed by the breakfast and robbery, since Eddie, on collecting Orange, says to him, "Showtime," and Orange doubly arms himself, reassures himself about not getting hurt, and the police car that's been arranged trails them to the meeting location that becomes the rendezvous point they need to know about, while shadows are long, showing it is indeed morning before the day's subsequent events. All 4 in the car have the same clothes at the meeting, while this is likely the 3rd time Eddie collects Orange from his apartment.
To be continued. Reservoir Dogs. Any questions?